John, are we recording still?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. So we'll start with my plate. And if you've seen any of my presentations, if you come to any of my classes, you know that my plate is where we start off, as this is the foundation of the recommended eating practices or eating habits that we all need. So my plate is based off of the dietary guidelines for Americans. These come out every 5 years. Lucky for us, this is the year where they're revamping the guidelines, updating it with the newest science, and they should be released hopefully sometime next year. But my plate shows us how to eat for good health. So based on the studies, population studies, and dietary studies, this is the overall consensus of what allows us to live healthier lives. It's setting up our plate like this as many times as we can, breakfast, maybe lunch and dinner, ensuring that half of our plate has fruits and vegetables, grains and protein on the other half, and then dairy. So just a review to make sure we're all on the same page. We all know what fruits are, and we're not gonna get into the botanical, if the seeds are inside, then is a vegetable a fruit, or what is happening there. In the nutrition realm, we think of it more of based on of the flavor profile. So our fruits are what we traditionally think of as being sweeter, and our vegetables are what we consider to be savory. On the other side, we have our grains. And as a review, that's our breads, our rice, our pasta, tortillas, cereal, oatmeal. That's what we lump together in the grains group. As far as proteins, we have our animal and plant sources. So your meat, beans, meat, fish, chicken, poultry, that would be our animal sources. And then you have your beans, your nuts, your seeds, your soy, that would be your plant-based proteins. And last but not least, we have dairy. And while it does say dairy, and we know that dairy means from cows, it's also a place for people who choose not to consume dairy to put in their milk alternatives. So that could be a soy milk, an almond milk, or whatever they fancy that would give them the same nutrition profile. So this is where we start out. This is what we know for the most part we need to be eating. We know that we need to eat our fruits and vegetables. And sometimes it is harder to put into practice than it is to just know about it. But it's a good reminder, and it's a visual, an easy visual that when you sit down to eat, you look at your plate and you wonder, is half of it at least fruits or vegetables? If not, it gives you something easy to tackle and work on. So we'll delve a little bit more. I would be remiss if I did not mention water, the importance of water, and I have a big container here, which you really can't see, but if you see me stop and take a sip of water, it keeps us going, it fuels all of our cells, it keeps us hydrated, and we know that it's beneficial for our health to be hydrated at all times, especially here in Florida, especially if you're out in the garden or just outside walking. It's very easy to become dehydrated. As we age, we lose our thirst senses, so we may not feel thirsty as often, but truth be told, we still need to be consuming as much water as we always have, at least in our adult life. So at least that 8 cups, aim for 9 to 12 if you're brave, but at least definitely those 8 cups of water. So starting out with nutrition and mental health, we do have some information of studies of how nutrition and mental health are related. So what we know is that the quality of food that you eat can have an impact not only on your physical health, but also on your mental health. Unhealthy diets can lead to major health problems that we know about, like diabetes, heart disease, obesity, and we'll discuss even cancer. And poor diet is the main cause of early death in the developed countries. So it's something that we can change, and it can affect us for the better, both physically and mentally. As we've discussed already, a healthy diet includes a range of vegetables, fruits, your legumes, your fish, whole grains, nuts, avocados, olive oil. These are all foods that are beneficial for mental health. We know that people who eat a diet high in whole foods, so fresh whole foods, not super highly processed foods, that would be your fruits, vegetables, nuts, whole grains, legumes, fish, etc., are up to 35% less likely to develop depression than people who eat less of these foods. So just by eating healthier foods, you're reducing your risk for depression. And remember, we mentioned that we are in these weird, awkward times when we can't do our usual, meet in person, have interactions, and all of that can take a toll on our mental health. So what we can do is boost not only our immune system, but also our sense of well-being by eating the right foods and fueling our body correctly. At the same time, we know that highly processed, fried, and sugary foods have little nutritional value, and research has shown that regularly including these kinds of foods can increase your risk of developing depression by as much as 60%. So eating well reduces our risk by 30%, and eating poorly increases our risk by 60%. So it's really up to us to set our brains up on the right track and the healthier track. Studies have shown too that diet is linked to the hippocampus, and that's the area of the brain that is involved with learning, memory, and mental health. And those with healthier diets have more hippocampal volume. So correlation, causation, not sure, but it is something to keep in mind that it's not just it is in your head in the sense that it's in your brain, but it's also something that we know to be true. So all of that to say, eating well can impact our physical well-being, also our mental well-being. Now I know, Master Gardeners, you like to know a little bit more. You want a little bit more information. You want a little bit more detail. So here are some nutrients that I want you to keep in mind when you're thinking about how to boost your mental well-being. What are some nutrients that I should look out for? And truth be told, they're great for your overall health and well-being as well. So the omega-3 fatty acids, the B vitamins, there's a range of them, and vitamin D are 3 that have been studied and have shown to be linked to better health. So omega-3 fatty acids are essential to brain health and can reduce inflammation and can reduce the risk of heart disease. And if you're wondering what that is on the screen, those C's and H's and O's, that's just the chemical form, or just what we would map it out as, of an omega-3 fatty acid at the top and a saturated fatty acid at the bottom. It's just for a visual, there's no test on that. We know that people who eat diets rich in omega-3 fatty acids also have that 30% reduced risk of depression. And so when you think of your omega-3s, typically we think of fish, oily fish. We sometimes think of nuts and olive oils for that. As far as the B vitamins, we know that B vitamins help to regulate neurotransmitters, immune functions, and people who eat foods rich in these, right, you would imagine would have a better outcome with that. I did not include it on here, but I also should have folate or folic acid as part of the B vitamins. And people who eat foods rich in folate have a lower risk of depression. And at the same time, people who are low in vitamin B12, another of the B vitamins, and you may have heard of it, you could be at increased risk for depression. This is true especially for us as we age. If we're consuming fewer protein sources or having problems digesting the animal sources of protein, we might be at risk for a B12 deficiency. And we see that a B12 deficiency can be associated with a risk for depression. Last but not least, we have vitamin D. Vitamin D is a super vitamin. It's great for brain functioning, mood, critical thinking. And we know that low levels of this are also linked to depression. And when you think of seasonal depression in upper, not in Florida, because thankfully we have sun year round, but in other areas where people in the wintertime have less exposure to the sun, they have a higher risk for depression, and they also have a higher risk for lower vitamin D. So eating nutritious foods can go a long way toward achieving a healthy lifestyle, and it's important to make every bite count. Now I went through that fast and you're like, wait a minute, I want the list. What are the foods? Tell me exactly what I need to eat so that I can improve my diet, so that I can have a healthy brain, so that I can be predisposed to a better sense of well-being rather than depression. And you will have it in a couple of slides. So do not worry, but keep these in mind: your omega-3, your B vitamins, and your vitamin D. Okay, a couple other things that we'll mention: the gut-brain connection. So trust your gut, right? We all have that feeling. Sometimes we feel it in the pit of our stomachs when we're making an important decision, or when we're anxious, or when we're nervous, or when something doesn't feel right, right? We think about it and associate it with our stomachs. And truth be told, the gut is also thought of as our second brain. It does communicate directly with your brain up here, both through the vagus nerve and through neurotransmitters. So the brain and the gut can communicate, and they are also affecting our immune function, and a lot of that is predetermined by the bacteria that live in our gut, the gut microbiota. So you see a fun picture of them there. There are trillions of bacteria that live in our gut, and a lot of them are really beneficial. So it's important to take care of them. It's important to feed them healthy. And lucky for us, bacteria like to eat the same foods that are good for us, right? And we have that symbiotic relationship. When we think of taking care of our gut and our microbiota, you might hear these words, prebiotic, probiotic, it's thrown around in commercials. What do they mean? A prebiotic, typically you can think of that as the fiber that feeds the bacteria. So bacteria love to digest fiber that our body otherwise can't and makes good stuff out of it. So feeding your body whole foods, whole grains, fruits and vegetables, and all of those great things can feed the bacteria, help them thrive, which in turn helps us thrive. When you hear the word probiotic, that is actual live bacteria that can exist in food. So when you think of yogurt and they say contains millions of probiotics, live active bacteria, and the idea is that you have the good bacteria that we know about. So if we just put them in our food and hopefully it gets to our intestines, the good bacteria will take over, will colonize, and prevent some of the bad bacteria from getting us ill, while also helping it do its function. So we think of probiotics, we think of foods that are fermented. We might think of yogurt, sauerkraut and kimchi. We might think of miso soup, kefir, kombucha, tempeh. Things like that are typically our sources of live bacteria, our probiotics. It's also found in supplemental form, as long as it says that there are billions of live colony forming units. But at the same time, rather than looking for the supplement or the addition, a great thing to do is to just feed the existing bacteria. They'll be happy and your stomach will be happy too. Okay, so I promised you a list, and here it is. Don't be overwhelmed. But these are some you can think of as superfoods. Why? Because they have all the things we talked about. They might have omega-3 fatty acids, which we said help with inflammation and help with the brain and are linked to lower risk of depression. They might have some folate or folic acid or B12. So these are all B vitamins that we've already mentioned, are also associated with better mental health. Vitamin D, we talked about that as well. And then we just went over prebiotics and probiotics. So, you might be scrambling thinking, okay, let me make sure I jot these down, and I have my dark leafy greens, and I have my legumes, and I have my oily fish, whole grains, nuts, etc. And I would say, don't be alarmed. Take it easy. Take a deep breath, because the best way to include all of these in your day-to-day life can be summarized by my plate, right? It's where we started. It's what we come back to. My plate encourages us to eat all of those superfoods, all of those dark leafy greens, all of the whole grains. We're encouraged to eat at least 2 servings of oily fish per day. We're encouraged to include our nuts, our beans, and as well as our yogurt, our dairy, right? So rather than get all frazzled over trying to include individual foods and memorize these and commit them to memory, what I do recommend, is that you just really focus on following my plate. If you do it well enough, if you make sure that you're including a variety of foods within each of the food groups and choosing the healthier options whenever possible, that is going to help you obtain all of these superfoods in your diet, and therefore you would obtain all of these great nutrients that are linked with better mental health. So as we're trying to figure out this new normal that everyone calls it, or I guess new normal for the time being, these are the foods that we can include in our diet to hopefully get us better armored and suited, but also just for overall health, for physical health, mental health. These are all great foods, and it's easy if you just remember my plate. I have some handouts that you don't have right now, but I could make them available. John, I could maybe send them to you and you could distribute. So here's one. Start simple with my plate. So the same things that we've talked about, focusing on whole fruits, varying your veggies, varying your protein, making half your grains whole grains, moving to low fat or fat-free milk, and drinking and eating less sodium, saturated fats, and added sugars. Nutrition can get really complicated if you want it to, or it can get really simple if you choose for it to. Now, we've talked about the benefits of fresh foods. We've talked about the benefits for our mental health and our well-being of our fresh foods. And I wanted to switch gears slightly to show kind of the other side. Whoops, sleep and stress. We'll come back to these if we have time. But I did want to talk about the opposite. The opposite is also true. We know all of these great foods, all of these fabulous foods can help us be healthy, can have all sorts of benefits to our bodies on the inside, for our mental health and our well-being. And then there are also foods that can harm or increase our risk for diseases, right? And so I borrowed some slides, and I'm giving due credit here with the presenters, all of the organizations that were involved in this talk, and it's foods that fight colorectal cancer. So why colorectal cancer? Well, it's actually the second leading cause of cancer-related deaths. We'll discuss each of these bullet points in a minute, but it's most of them are diagnosed in the regional or distant stage. We know 75% of the cancer diagnoses for colorectal cancer are sporadic. We also know that it's highly preventable. So I wanted to briefly shed some light on that. As we mentioned, it is the second leading cause of cancer death. Here you have the number, the incidence, if you were to compare it to other types of cancer. Colorectal is up there. It is a third in incidence. And then second in mortality if you were to combine it. So if you combined male and female colorectal cancer deaths, it would be second in the list, just below lung and other respiratory cancers. So it's something very serious, and hopefully something that we don't have to deal with on our personal lives or those of those people that we love. But it is something important to be aware of. As we mentioned, over 60% of the cases are found in the distal region, and this is just showing you how the cancer can progress. With earlier screenings, I believe the current recommendation is 45, starting the screen at age 45. The idea is to find them earlier on. The earlier we find the cancer, the more likely we are able to successfully treat it versus when it progresses into later stages. And this is just the 5-year relative survival rate. This is the ones that we want to catch. If we catch it in the earlier localized stage, we have basically a 90% chance 5-year survival rate. The later in stages that we catch it, then the lower our survival rate. So again, the recommendation for earlier screening is to hopefully catch it early on. We mentioned 75% of cases are sporadic. So you see here, this is the piece of the pie, the percentages that can be attributed to family risk or the Lynch syndrome or any of these other ones. And then the 75% are sporadic. There is no precisely known cause for these. However, we do know that it is colorectal cancer is highly preventable. So, assuming that we want to improve our chances of not getting colorectal cancer or not letting it progress, we see that the primary prevention, a lot of it has to do with diet, physical activity, and body weight. So just like we discussed, eating well, having a healthier lifestyle, looking out for our well-being can improve our physical health, our mental health, and reduce our risk for cancer. So there's this, it's a little busy, but I want to just point out the square at the top. So these are the research findings from the American Institute of Cancer Research, and I want to look at the strong evidence. So what do we know with very strong evidence that can decrease our risk and can increase our risk? Luckily for us, we just talked a lot. We didn't mention too much physical activity, but we just talked a lot about the things that are very probable or convincingly to decrease our risk, and that's physical activity, whole grains, fiber, think fruits, vegetables, whole grains, dairy products, and calcium supplements. And then it's also really important to know what can increase our risk. Things like processed meats, alcoholic drinks, increased body fatness, adult attained height, and consumption of red meat. It's just as important to know what we should do as it is to know what we should avoid. So I will breeze through these. Let's skip that slide for now. So we mentioned limiting consumption of processed meats and red meats. So we have convincing evidence that consumption of processed meats can increase our risk for colorectal cancer. So we want to avoid that. We want to pull back, reduce our consumption of processed meats. We also see that there is some relation to red meat. So for reference, this is a 3-ounce serving of a processed meat. It could be a steak that is the size of a deck of cards, a hamburger that's the size of your palm, 3 slices of bacon, 1 to 2 hot dogs. So if we want to limit it, we don't want to include this very often. In fact, the recommendation is less than 18 ounces of cooked red meats per week. So I would even venture to say if you can aim for less than that, that would be even better, because then you would also be able to include the fish, the lean proteins, and all the other sources of protein that have beneficial effects. And here's the list of foods that are considered processed meats and things that we should maybe avoid: sausage, bacon, ham, hot dog, pepperoni, and all of your deli meats right there. So these are things that we want to limit or avoid to decrease our risk for colorectal cancer. Now, to counter it, kind of very similar to what we just discussed, we want to eat foods that will do something called reduce our oxidative stress, or they will act within the cell level to reduce some or prevent some changes from happening. And the best thing to do is to choose antioxidant-rich foods. We know these to be our brightly colored fruits and veggies. Hey, similar recommendation: increase whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds. We can use anti-inflammatory foods and spices for those of us who like to add extra flavor to our foods: turmeric, ginger, garlic, onions, rosemary, dark chocolate, and eliminate excess sugars. Again, it can be very distracting to get caught up into the minutia of what these little recommendations are, or it can be very easy to think back to my plate and say, sure, as long as I follow my plate, I will be doing all of these things. When we talk about whole grain, this is a great picture, and it's something that our Master Gardener volunteers I find relate to when I explain it. Is when you think of the grain as a seed, and you think of the seed as having that seed coat, that endosperm, and that germ, the whole grain refers to flours made up by grinding the entire seed, using the entire seed to create a food product, versus a refined grain removes the bran, removes the germ, and only keeps that starchy endosperm. In doing so, we reduce proteins, we reduce nutrients, we reduce fiber. Some of it is added back or fortified, but it's not the same as eating the whole grain product. So when we stress whole grains, this is what a whole grain means. And again, there is evidence for whole grains protecting against colorectal cancer. Non-starchy vegetables that protect against aerodigestive cancer, so anything from your mouth to your stomach. Dietary fiber to protect against colorectal cancer, weight gain, overweight, obesity, and so many others. And so these are some of our best sources of fibers. Again, if you like to jot down some of these, that's great. If you remember my plate, my plate, my plate, all of these will be included in my plate. Your apples, your berries, your avocados, Brussels sprouts, which I love, your beans, and your nuts and seeds. Some anti-inflammatory foods. Again, colorful, bright vegetables, colorful, bright fruits and vegetables. As long as you're including them, whichever ones you like, chances are you're going to be including some of these that have anti-inflammatory properties. There are some others that have been shown to have synergistic properties, so they work well based on how you cook them, based on what you eat them with. And if you're, come on, computer. Okay, my slides want to freeze, but the next slide was just going to show some of the components of these synergistic foods. Bear with me for a moment because we are almost to the end. Okay. The joys of working with technology. You never know when it's going to play nice and when it's not. I promise we don't have 80-something slides. It's just I hit a lot of them. As I mentioned, the PowerPoint that we were just viewing was one that was presented by the individuals that I listed. So I only picked out the ones that I thought would be most helpful. Okay. All right, so while that's taking its time to think, I would like to ask you and challenge you to start thinking about what is one thing that you could do to improve your well-being, to reduce your risk for things like colorectal cancer, you know, all these diseases that we typically hear of, like your heart disease, diabetes, all of them. And there's a lot of recommendations, and these are, for example, for cancer prevention. But there's a lot of things that you could choose from. You could choose to maintain your weight. You could choose to be physically active, to limit your consumption of red and processed meats, to eat a diet rich in fruits and vegetables, etc., 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 etc. And you can choose one. And you can choose one to start with and make a SMART goal, something that's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. An example of that would be, I will increase my consumption of legumes to 2 times a week. I will include beans in my diet 2 times a week. That's very specific, it's very small, but it's also a step in the right direction. You could choose to reduce something like alcohol consumption or red or processed meats and say, I choose to only consume it once every 2 weeks or once a month, whatever works with your lifestyle. So while there are a lot of things that we could do to help our well-being, it's important to start small. So again, here's an example. If you're focusing on whole grains or foods containing fiber, your goal could be to increase your consumption of whole grains to 3 or more per week. Your goal could be to add a certain number of steps or active minutes, because we know that can help decrease our risk. Your goal is yours, and it's something that you should be able to feel confident in achieving. As far as the cancer information that I discussed, AICR.org, American Institute for Cancer Research, would have a plethora of resources available to you. And as far as what I discussed, I also have the sources available. Most of them came from mentalhealthamerica.net. And so all of these would be available to you. I can also make available the contact information for the ladies who presented with the American Institute for Cancer Research if you wanted to know more. But as always, I am also available at the Extension office, place that you guys are all very familiar with, for any kinds of questions or topics that you might have an interest in learning more about. So with that, are there questions? This part is for you to be able to ask some questions. If you're familiar with the chat box, you're able to put them in there. Or John, if you'd like to suggest a different way for questions, that's fine by me too.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, we can check the chat box, or you guys can unmute yourselves and just ask her directly over audio here. Whatever works best for you guys. Go ahead and throw them out there to Vigi.
Vigi, this is Patricia. Would you consider cabbage a dark leafy vegetable like kale and spinach, or is it in a different category?
That's a very good question. I don't know, and I have a picture of a cabbage here. So, So it's not totally dark and leafy, right? But it is the cruciferous family, and the cruciferous family is known to have tons of benefits, particularly for colorectal cancer or colorectal cancer prevention or colorectal health. Just like its cousins, you know, like the Brussels sprouts and things like that. They're all great for health. So is it considered a leafy green? I'm not sure. I'd have to check to see what determines what is a leafy green and what is not, but we do know it to be extremely healthy.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And I think I saw a chat.
You've got some questions here. So, so let's see. From Carrie, uncured meats. What's a good alternative?
So what do you mean by uncured meats? I'm not familiar.
Or are they a good alternative?
Oh, are they a good alternative? Well, I think the recommendation as far as, for example, the colorectal cancer risk was to reduce red meats, right? And if we have it right here. So reducing them to less than 18 ounces per week. So if they're processed in the way that these are, they're probably going to be similarly harmful. If they're not, then just as long as we're reducing it to the recommendations. And I see another question about, is it useful to switch to turbinado or Demetria sugar? Sugar is such an interesting topic because everybody would like to sell you their better sugar. Truth be told is our body will digest sugar and break it down to glucose in its most basic form. How quickly it does it will vary based on the type of sugar. So even when you consider honey or just white sugar, how quickly that happens can vary slightly, but at the end of the day, sugar will turn to sugar. So whatever sugar you prefer or taste-wise you like, as long as you can minimize the consumption of it, that would be the best recommendation.
All right. I see one on here from Sandy. Since dark and bright colors are better, is red apple considered a red fruit or a white fruit?
That's a good question. I do know that eating the apple with the skin on is better than peeling it. So if you consider the brightness and the red of the apple, there might be some benefits found in the peel. Because of its color, you would imagine there might be some additional goodies there. So that's a good question. I guess it's a white fruit with red outside.
I've got one here from Janice. Recently, a friend recommended agave. So I guess maybe agave syrup, like what she might be saying. She was curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So similar to the other types of sugar, agave is one that we know that that might have a slower glycemic response. However, it will still turn to sugar. So it would be, in the short term, slightly better, but in the long run, if we're using it like there's no tomorrow, well then what benefit are we taking?
So, yeah, I'm kind of curious here when people say uncured meats, like somebody mentioned on here, uncured meats are still cured. They just use celery juice as the source of the nitrates rather than isolated nitrates. It's a marketing tactic.
Interesting.
Are you familiar with that at all, or?
I'm not, and I'm gonna have to look it up so that I can better answer your questions there. But it's very interesting. You know, in the world of marketing, you can spin anything whichever way you want to make it sound great. As long as people buy it, people will do it.
Okay, we got one from Andrea. How about soybean-based meat alternatives? Any issues or benefits?
Okay, so soybean-based meat alternatives. So we know that soy can provide some active compounds that are beneficial to our health. We know that soy is a great source of protein if you choose to go vegetarian. What we also know is processing, and when we process something and we're adding extra ingredients to it for preservation or something like that, it alters the food, right? It's no longer just soybeans. Like you can think of like shelled edamame. So I don't know what studies have been done to look at soybean processed meat alternatives and the health effects of those. What I can say is, in general, soy would give you some benefits, and it would be lower in, it wouldn't have any of the saturated fats or things of that nature that we think of meats having. So it's kind of, it's a yes and. So yes, it can be beneficial to us. It can give us less of the saturated fats, provide us with all the vitamins. At the same time, it is more processed. So how is it processed? What's added to it, and what effect that has? I'd have to see what has been done to study that.
Cool. Let's see here. So Nancy says, you mentioned that older adults lose their sense of thirst. At what age does the loss of sense of thirst start, and what is the rate of decline?
I don't have an exact answer for the age, so I'd have to get back to you on what age exactly, but we do know it to be true that older adults will feel less thirsty throughout the day. And that's why it's hypercritical for us as we age to get into the habit of drinking water rather than the response to our physical cue. So rather than just saying, I'll drink water when I feel thirsty, is giving yourself a goal, whether that's starting small based on where you're at, or keeping up based on what you've been doing or what you know you used to drink. You may not feel as thirsty, and sometimes we also don't want to drink as much water because then we have to go to the restroom more often. But it is important to maintain that water intake because we know that our bodies may not tell us as much as they used to.
Okay, got another one here from Nancy. What is the adult height component for colorectal cancer mentioned on one of your charts?
I had to look that one up myself. I wasn't too sure of what they referred to there. And we do know that if you're nutrient deprived as a child, you won't grow, at the normal rate. And I think it had something to do with that, and then increasing the amount of, or the intake of the nutrients as you age. It also said something to do with the genetic predisposition to be taller. It's something that caught my eye as well, so I did have to look it up, and I'm not clear of why. I think and what I found was not a clear indication of why, just that there's a correlation with gaining height as an adult as opposed to through the normal aging process. It's interesting.
I got a quick question. These alternative meats that are like, I guess, basically grown in like bioreactors and stuff like that, Impossible Burger, is there anything out there on the research relating to them to whether they're healthier or unhealthier in any ways?
Yeah, I'm not too sure if studies have been done on them specifically. What I have read is that the Impossible Burger, for example, it is considered processed, right? There's a bunch of ingredients in there, and sometimes the macronutrient profile is still not great. So it might be something that is not animal based, but it might still be really high in fat. It might still be really high in sodium. There's a lot of processing that goes into it. So I think they're a fun alternative to eat just as often as you would maybe just enjoy one of these sometimes foods. Like I personally don't eat red meats, just it doesn't sit well with my stomach. But even if I did, I wouldn't necessarily eat a fatty hamburger, cheeseburger, whatever on a regular basis. I would eat it every once in a while. So I would think of the Impossible Burgers or the like the same way. And there's more to come too down the pipeline with cell-based meat products. So that'll be a whole nother realm when you make meats out of a petri dish. Yeah, it'll be fun.
Well, cool. I don't think that there's any more questions here. So I just wanted to say thank you, Vigi, for being available here for our last Lunch and Learn. We're going on a little bit of a hiatus, but I just wanted to give everybody else a chance to see what some of our colleagues are up to here, and it seemed to be you get quite a few questions. So
yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. And again, I will type my email here in case you have questions. If not, you could always reach out to John, and I'm sure he could make the link for you. But it was my pleasure to come and speak to you all. I hope it was helpful, and maybe we've set some small goals to work towards.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. I guess we'll just go into our meeting here from here on out. We just do the all members meeting, which honestly, I don't have a whole lot to tell you guys. Like this week, I'm trying to think if there's anything in particular that's come up here. Um, in terms of operations, we're still in relative suspension. I mean, and I guess one of the things that has come up is that UF was in phase 3 and the county was in phase 2, but I think they have both moved to phase 2 now. So I guess things are closer to how they were. I think probably in like early July or so, they started easing up a little bit. So just something to keep in mind. Like we're not going to be able to ease up on anything here very soon in terms of the starting to have people come back for certain things like that. It's my hope that maybe at some point, like when both of them get on the phase 3 or something like that, we might be able to start having more people come back that are in the vulnerable populations, specifically like regarding age. But for the time being, we're not there yet. So, and not only that, we're one of the epicenters for the whole world in terms of COVID, and so there's just no need to like put ourselves at risk here for the time being if we can help it. And but stay tuned. I would like to have people come back in a wider range of capacities here. So I'll keep you all posted via email and via these. But we won't have another Lunch and Learn until September 12th. And for that one, we'll have Rob Northrup. He's an extension faculty member, like over in Hillsborough County. He deals with natural resources and urban forestry, but he also deals with wildlife issues, and he'll be giving a presentation on urban biodiversity. So that's something that kind of feeds into like our home landscapes. Like we have a lot of different opportunities there to support wildlife, support the environment in different ways to kind of make them natural or less natural, depending on what we want to try and what our objectives are. So anyway, he'll talk all about that. If there's September 9th, yes, it's September 9th, not the 12th. Pardon me. So September 9th, and then on the 23rd, we'll have Larry Noblick. He's a professor from Montgomery Botanical Garden. And he'll be talking about like conservation gardening. He goes out and finds rare specimens of plants and documents if they're still around even, and then they try to bring them back a lot of the time so that like they've got a refuge for these plants. If it's in South Florida, one of the few places that we can grow a lot of these tropicals and keep them safe in the U.S. So outside of that, if anyone's got any questions, concerns, comments, let's just go right into it here. Well, I'll give it like half a minute here, and then if I don't hear anything, I guess we'll just go ahead and cut out. I would keep it up for the breakout rooms, but I got a meeting at 1 o'clock, so I can't do multiple things on Zoom. It doesn't let you do that, so I've got to cut it in terms of that. I guess also something to keep in mind, I will be out at the end of the month from the 27th until like we come back for Labor Day. So I'll be out for 1 week, a little more than 1 week, the first week of September. So if you guys like, just keep in mind that I won't really be around for that point. So, all right. Well, everybody, stay safe. This concludes our summer session of weekly Lunch and Learns. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you all are looking forward to when we resume here in September. And I hope everybody's staying safe and staying active in the ways that you can. And look forward to seeing you all more, like via Zoom, maybe in person a little bit, like at that point. But everybody take care.